So, welcome to RosFM. This is Feeling Good with Tove Kane. And the effect of being in her orbit is to feel exceptional, not just good. Please welcome, it's Eve Earley. She is a coach, a catalyst, and a connector. And she's an extraordinary businesswoman, a wonderful mentor. And she's also the producer of an exciting event coming to Ireland. It's Eve Earley. Welcome to Feeling Good, Eve.
Thank you. And thank you for that very generous introduction. I really appreciate it.
It's so good that you've given us some time today. I know in all of your businesses you're exceptionally busy, but we are delighted to hear that Speak is coming to Ireland. Now, for a lot of people, that is something that is new to them. But before we get on to the fact that you are producing Speak, let's just find out a bit more about you. And we can tell by your accent, of course, that you've blown across.
So that question, where are you from, changed my life. It was back in the late 90s, and I was doing the first of several courses with the New York Jung Society. And what we were studying was Carl Jung's archetypal psychology, the myths, if you will, but in Ireland, Celtic myths based on far more feminine goddesses than you would experience in the stories of Rome or Greece or even the Norse stories. And at a meet and greet, the first night of the first course, we were in a beautiful area called Cavan. The town was called Virginia, and we were singing a myth called the Children of Lur. And a meet and greet, glasses of wine, and someone says to me, "Where are you from?"
Mm.
And up until that moment in time, I might have said Philadelphia. It was where I had moved when I married and reared a family. But what fell out of my mouth was, well, originally from New York. And when I married, I reared my family in Philadelphia. Oh, do you like it? And I was left in stunned silence because in that way of living automatically, I don't think I'd ever asked myself the question. And I don't think that until that moment I had ever identified myself as having had a life before marriage and children, or owned it in the way that somehow I did in that moment. So that's a story. I was born and reared in New York City, in the suburbs. I joke that I wound up in Ireland, in a lovely medieval village, the first settlement beyond the proverbial pale, called Carlingford, where I had wound up after an early childhood at 68th and Broadway. I now or then lived 2 fields over from Cooley Kickham's, which was the name of the football club. So whether I've measured my life in city blocks or fields, I've transitioned to a whole new life, and moved across the pond 16 years ago and embraced a life in a totally different culture, one in which I'm privileged and advantaged because I'm Irish American and I have an Irish passport, thanks to grandparents born here. But I have nonetheless experienced life as the other, life as an immigrant. And I identify as an immigrant because a brilliant young woman challenged me in my early days when I said, "Yes, an American expat." And she looked at me disgusted and said, "You're only an expat because you're white.
Wow.
If you were anything else, you'd be an immigrant." And suddenly, just like that question about where are you from, I had a whole new way to frame these are the turning points. So when I call myself a coach, a catalyst, and a connector, what I'm inviting people to do is connect with the kinds of people who will challenge them, to embrace curiosity about what what we're doing automatically and what we need to do to expand our lives instead of kind of isolate down into them.
I think that's a fascinating response to that kind of statement, something that makes us think rather than react. So I really enjoyed hearing the way you responded to that and the way that you've unfolded it a little bit further and understood yourself differently. That's really interesting. You are producing this amazing event, which you're bringing into Ireland for the very first time.
So what's interesting about it is that back in 2012, I got into the business, if you will, of producing unconferences, we called them, biz camps, and we would bring together as many as 30 speakers in a day in a somewhat informal way. It became more formal as time went on. We would offer people the opportunity to choose a speaker of three every 45 minutes. So there was a big list on the board, and there was a list of three speakers, a session going all the way down, and you would just choose what you wanted to hear about. So I would be lining up 30 speakers at a time in these various events. And I always thought that what I was seeking were people who could bear witness to success stories, both in tech and entrepreneurship, because I started at the height of the crash here, and we were trying to develop a supportive entrepreneurial ecosystem across Northern Ireland and the border counties. And in hindsight, what I realized is that these weren't the success stories that I thought people were bearing witness to. It wasn't, here's how I won at the game of business, but rather how I won at the game of life. And one thing that came through was that we have a way of being in the world that has us embrace that liminal space between certainty and uncertainty. If you identify as Irish and you live in Northern Ireland, you're an odd bird, at least from the point of view of what flag is flying, and vice versa. If you have no opinion, you're an odd bird because everyone around you wants to have an opinion. Case in point. What we have done is evolved with what I think we sometimes call survival skills. And we sometimes put down that kind of flexibility and willingness to be tolerant or embrace different ways of being in the world, different ways of being if we're in this crowd or that crowd. And I would argue that that's a skill that we have internalized that makes us successful here, navigating changes like an economic crisis, I better start my own business or I'll starve, or as immigrants, because we weren't locked into, well, I'm an accountant and I have to be an accountant if I go to Australia or America. No, used to be an accountant, but I'll do whatever I have to do to make a living. We have this capacity to go with the flow. It's been my mission to bring these stories forward so we begin to honor that. In this culture of whatever you say nothing, I'm like, no, 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 no. We're going to shout out about how good we are at navigating uncertainty. Putting 10 talks together on that subject, it was intriguing. And while this is Speak's first event in Ireland, I came across them because they did their first international event last October in Belfast. So if you go to Speak, transformations, there's a wonderful story by Kristen Donnelly, another American blow-in to Northern Ireland, with a story of, wow, you should get to know the people in this place. So rather than have me say, wow, you should get to know the people in this place, I'm going to let you hear their stories.
We're really excited to hear more about that. We're going to go to one of the songs that you've chosen today, and it does, I would say, emulate that spirit of uncertainty. If you want to lead us into why you love it so much.
This idea of a home awaits me. I grew up in a not atypical, but still toxic alcoholic family environment, waiting uh, according to my grandmother's wisdom, for when I grow up, everything will be better. Um, which is true if we don't take the survival skills of our wounded soul into our adulthood, because they will actually hold us back. And I think that even in my early years of coming to terms with the fact that there was as much to recover from in order to move on, in order to have more agency in my life, I needed the promise that there was something else out there. So I think that's what I always heard in this song.
You're listening to RosFM, a choice here from Eve Earley. And thanks to Heinz Pharmacy, we bring you Feeling Good every Monday afternoon right here on RosFM. You're tuned to RosFM. We're in conversation with producer, coach, catalyst, and connector Eve Earley. And she was just moments before talking to us about Speak Uncertainty and the prospect of 10 speakers on stage right here in Ireland. Eve, it is fantastic to have you on the radio with us today. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And we are intrigued about Speak Uncertainty. How did you go about finding these next speakers, given that you indicated to us before that this is a realm that you've long enjoyed? How did you make the choice this time around?
I had a lot of help. One of the gifts of being a blow-in, of arriving in Ireland at midlife after my youngest had gone off to university. I literally ran away from home. I landed in a place where when I was making acquaintances or developing collegial relationships, the people who landed with me were homecomers or blow-ins, because frankly, people of this place had no idea what to do with me. But folks who had lived away had an experience
Yeah.
of what it was like to choose to live here.
Yeah, that's
So, so one of the most confounding things to me, and I love the way you described Carlingford Lough and the Mournes, when you are in this beautiful medieval, mostly still walled village. I mean, there's the medieval gates to the village are still there. In any event, when you're there, you are looking out at Carlingford Lough and the Mournes, which was C.S. Lewis's inspiration for Narnia. And so I used to say that I would have been successful in my work, bearing witness to the locals about how, not even rose-colored glasses, but how wonderful this place was. If I could go 30 days when someone wouldn't say to me, sure, what would you be doing moving to this feckin' country for? Excuse my French, but that's a local take on it. And I would just look at them and say, I don't know. I live in feckin' Narnia. Where do you live? So one of those people who was a homecomer was a wonderful woman called Alison Matthews, who has made a specialization of her business running events. And she's also been heavily involved in networking events in Northern Ireland. So I have to say that half of our speakers, yourself included, came at Alison's recommendation.
The way you describe it is absolutely delicious. I can see that so much in the nature of living here deserves for us to wake up a little locally, doesn't it? And you've picked this particular version of a Wham classic, but it's done in Irish. So give us a little background as to the choice and why you love it so much.
When I came, I had to make peace with the Irish language. I came to Carlingford. I had little or no knowledge of the troubles of life in Ireland. While I have had an Irish American father and two grandparents from Longford, my parents divorced when I was very young, and I was reared by my mother's Italian family. I had no knowledge of anything culturally Irish. I had a vague notion you didn't wear orange on St. Patrick's Day, but beyond that, nothing. My business connections all managed to be in Newry. So I was living on the Irish side of the border and I was working on the UK side of the border. But Newry would be a largely Republican town. And so when the local politicians would open any meeting, they would begin in Irish, but they would begin in a way that was often not translated and designed to make the non-Irish speakers read the 3 to 5% Protestant. And me, I took it personally, not to understand, to be othered.
Mm.
And in a wonderful conversation with a woman who will be our compere on the evening, Carol Conway, who studied Irish at university, said to me, Eve, if you don't understand Irish, you will not understand the Irish people. And she went on to describe the structure of the language itself. There's no possessive. So it's not my coat. It's the coat on the chair or the coat on my shoulders. Mine is conceptually not part of it. I'm after going to the cinema as opposed to I went. Now, that'll give you a pretty good clue about what we're willing to put in the past if we don't even have words for the past. So there was so much to be learned. And I don't know how I stumbled onto this piece, probably YouTube. I did not understand the words. I later came to hear it in English, wake me up. But everything about the energy of the song drew me in. So my grandmother used to say the gods work in strange ways. Well, this was the God saying, you are going to make peace with this language, lady, because you're going to embrace this song. You're going to love it. And wait till you hear the message, because we've been telling you this for years. So it's Wake Me Up. I hope we're able to hear the Irish version of it. You can find it on YouTube. If it's just the English version, that's great too.
Thank you so much, Eve. You're listening to RosFM. I'm Tove Kane, and we'll be back in conversation again shortly with this wonderful producer who is so full of stories and enchantments. I want to hear more about Speak and more about Eve's life. So stay listening right here to RosFM. On RosFM, every Monday afternoon, it's Feeling Good with Tove Kane. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some time with me today. An unusual approach to the day. We are giving the entire hour to producer, coach, catalyst, and connector Eve Earley. And I think there's something interesting in what you're producing here in Ireland. It's the naming of the uncertainty from the perspective of 10 different speakers. And that in itself just shows you we live in an uncertain world, but our interpretations lead on to more uncertainty. This must have been quite cumbersome. You mentioned you were working with Alison Matthews. Lovely to see women in business curating an event, and you've chosen your compere in Carol as well. This is wonderful. I always like to see the idea that women can collaborate rather than be competitive with each other.
We're coming into a new age. When I arrived in Ireland 16 years ago, I was often frustrated. In my more uncharitable moments, I would say, why are we 20 years behind the States? When I was talking about the language of recovery, the language of feminism, movements, things that I was just used to, networking groups. I mean, when I arrived in 2008, Dundalk had the first, and I think at the time, only failed BNI, the business networking, major international business networking group that failed. And part of it was that culturally, especially on the border, we're suspicious. What are you going to take from me? What is this going to cost me? This competition versus collaboration was a very hard sell. And I don't know how much of that was culturally Irish or Northern Irish or post-conflict, but I was faced with it on a daily basis and confounded, I have to say, by it, and started a number of a Mums that Work group and a Women that Work group in the evenings, mums during the day. And it was just beginning to catch on. I honestly think when I watch the work that Alison is doing now with that little idea on steroids. Northern Ireland has amazing women's business networking groups now. Things have changed. in a way that gives me hope because I was despairing at times. And I think we forget how short 15 years is.
We want to find out a bit more about uncertainty, and this specific event that you're bringing out. And of course, as a producer, you have numerous other events that you'll be looking to produce in 2025 and beyond. But before that, just tell us about Lior, because I'd never heard of this particular artist.
I stumbled on his work. I actually don't know which came first, whether I came across a piece that was a kind of very folky, a music that evoked my youth, Folk City in Lower Manhattan. I mean, 100 years ago. But these songs that were very storytelling and very relatable. He lives in Australia. He was born and reared in Israel. So I don't know if I heard his work first or searched for him, and up comes this TED Talk. And this TED Talk was on Lior alongside Nigel Westlake about this symphony that Nigel composed called Compassion. And Compassion came out of a collaboration between them, sadly, around the death of Westlake's son. And Lior recorded a song, an ancient Hebrew song that would be actually part of ritual. And they presented it to the Sydney Symphony, and Sydney Symphony said, yeah, it's good. We'd like a whole symphony. And away they went to create something that did not come. Now, this particular song is from the Jewish tradition, but they wanted something that was far more universal. And so they began to research Arabic poems and music, and they brought together this symphony of both cultures and both traditions. And so the song that had me find my way there was Alvino Malkenu, which is a plea, let me be the best that I can be. And I think the one that I hope we're able to bring is Sim Shalom, which, however you pronounce it, is going to be heard as peace. I often say that for me to grow and come into myself enough to find my way across the pond and start a new life at 53 years old, I had to come to a place of forgiveness. I had to come to a place of peace in my own life, only to move to a place of unforgiveness. So this symphony of compassion it really is very meaningful to me.
You're listening to RosFM, and we're in conversation with producer, coach, catalyst, connector, Eve Earley. It's been a privilege listening to your thoughts today, Eve, and your music choices and the reasons behind your choices. This has been really quite a feast. We might be able to squeeze one more song in. We'll see if that's possible. I know it's a very special track and it comes from a very special time. So let's see if that's possible. But let's just talk briefly, if we can, about the fact that you've got your other events coming in 2025 and beyond. But we're coming with focus now to Dundalk, to November, and all about what's happening with Speak Uncertainty. So I know our listeners, the first thing they'll want to know is when, where, how much are their tickets still available? And can you just describe what they can expect from the evening, parking, all of these things? Let's start.
So on Thursday evening, November 7th, the doors will open at 6:15. We're going to start promptly at 7 o'clock. And 10 speakers will be presenting at an amazing venue called the Spirit Store. Tickets can be found at spiritstore.ie. And the event is Speak Uncertainty. And parking and the like, it's the Quay. So the quayside in Dundalk, parking is easily accessed. It's a wonderful venue. It's a music venue. And so the quality of everything you hear and see will be better than I imagined, frankly. And the 10 speakers range from Tove and her work on really getting us through the changes in life, laughing, and a young green tech entrepreneur, a blow-in to Ireland, um, uh, homecomers, people who, again, are making a choice to live here, folks who have battled the kind of uncertainty that comes with being unwell, that comes with difficult diagnoses, the kind of uncertainty that comes with gender issues, coming to terms with the privilege of being an old white man in Ireland. Um, we have so many differences, whether it's someone who's neurospicy and talking about adjusting to that identity, um, or someone who's just committed to empowering people to embrace emotional freedom. We don't know each other's wounds and woundedness, but there is something out there for all of us to be curious about in terms of understanding ourselves and others. So 10 people to just talk about things that you may not know that you don't know, or you may not recognize that you've always known. So it'll be an exciting and, I think, enchanting evening.
And Eve, it's not even that it's €10 per speaker. How much are the tickets?
It's €20. If we could have made it free, I promise you, we would have done that. That was the case in biz camps. So let me just say, with a lot of sponsorship, we could possibly make an event like this in the future free.
Yeah.
But at this point, it's €20 per ticket, and I hope that that isn't a bridge too far for most.
I think that's more than reasonable. And as you mentioned, for such an intriguing evening, all of these different speakers on stage, as one of them, I'm really privileged and I'm so grateful for the opportunity, not only just for the night, but just to get to know you and to spend time around you and to, you know, I said to Alison, one day when I grow up, I would very much like to be half as good as you are.
I think
She's
we might have had the same conversation with Allison. We're going to
she's
have to take her aside.
She is extraordinary. There is not an I that doesn't get dotted or a T that can't get crossed. She is extraordinary. And, it's wonderful to see that there's somebody who's creative and in flow like you, and she's almost like the yin to your yang in a way.
Um,
I think it's a great pairing. That's for sure.
I cannot take credit for this event without giving equal credit to Allison. It would not have happened. And I'm very grateful, for Carol's support as well. Because as you well know, we had a rehearsal. And there's great joy in having you all get to know each other and hear each other's stories.
Yes.
Um, and then there was, for me, two people to process with. Okay, who goes first? What's the balance? How are we going to just, yeah, it's, you know yourself. When you have the right team around you, no matter how much work, you're energized by it.
Yeah, this is wonderful. And I so look forward. How can people connect with you, Eve? Because I'm sure people listening would think, wow, she sounds dynamic. Does she have a website? Is she on social? Tell us more about Eve and where we can contact you.
So you can reach me, Eve, at empowering-change.com. You can find me on Twitter at, if we last there, empowering change without the A in change. LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me, Eve, Eve, Earley, Earley. And yeah, try the website. It's probably the best way
Yeah.
to get through, but I'm sure in our notes today there'll be some contact information. Um, yeah, empowering change. Just if you take nothing away, from this particular interview, just imagine that there's a time and a place for just about anyone to reinvent themselves, and that's my invitation. I want you to have what I found and have a shorter learning curve than I did.
I just love that. Have a shorter learning curve and come out feeling like, you know what, you can handle the uncertainty. We've been in conversation today with the most extraordinary woman. She is fascinating, and it's been a real privilege to speak to Coach, Catalyst, Connector, Eve Earley. And thank you so much. We close out with your choice of Coldplay today, Eve. One last message about the song and before we say our farewells.
So you will all be familiar with Just Say Yes. And there was an adaptive version done for the Londonderry bid to be the UK's first city of culture, a bid that they won. And I was pleased to work on part of the marketing for that bid. And the recording begins, the adapted version begins with Seamus Heaney's voice talking about hope and history rhyming. And again, it's a love letter, if you will, to Northern Ireland. So I encourage you all to go looking for that version. But just say yes. What?
Yeah.
Just say yes to your life, to what's new, to what we don't even know is out there.
I think that's solid advice. Thank you so much, Eve. It's been a privilege speaking to you today. Thank you. And all the very best for the Speak Uncertainty event on the 7th of November in Dundalk. And of course, your future projects coming in 2025 and beyond.
Looking forward. And thank you so much for this opportunity.